The law of supply and demand is a fundamental concept in economics that describes how the price of goods and services is determined in a market. Here's a breakdown of each component. Supply. This refers to the quantity of a good or service that producers are willing and able to sell at different prices at a given time. Generally, as the price of a good increases, producers are willing to supply more of it to the market because they can achieve higher revenues. When economists talk about supply, they mean the amount of some good or service a producer is willing to supply at each price. Price is what the producer receives for selling one unit of a good or service. A rise in price almost always leads to an increase in the quantity supplied of that good or service, while a fall in price will decrease the quantity supplied. When the price of gasoline rises, for example, it encourages profit-seeking firms to take several actions. Expand exploration for oil reserves. Drill for more oil. Invest in more pipelines and oil tankers to bring the oil to plants for refining into gasoline. Build new oil refineries. Purchase additional pipelines and trucks to ship the gasoline to gas stations, and open more gas stations or keep existing gas stations open longer hours. Economists call this positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, that a higher price leads to a higher quantity supplied and a lower price leads to a lower quantity supplied. The law of supply. The law of supply assumes that all other variables that affect supply are held constant. Demand. This refers to the quantity of a good or service that consumers are willing and able to purchase at different prices at a given time. Typically, as the price of a good decreases, consumers are willing to buy more of it. The interaction between supply and demand determines the market equilibrium price and quantity. At equilibrium, the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded, meaning there is no excess supply or demand. When demand exceeds supply, prices tend to rise, and when supply exceeds demand, prices usually fall. This mechanism helps allocate resources efficiently in a market economy. Economists use the term demand to refer to the amount of some good or service consumers are willing and able to purchase at each price. Demand is fundamentally based on needs and wants. If you have no need or want for something, you won't buy it. While a consumer may be able to differentiate between a need and a want, from an economist's perspective, they are the same thing. Demand is also based on ability to pay. If you cannot pay for it, you have no effective demand. By this definition, a person who does not have a driver's license has no effective demand for a car. What a buyer pays for a unit of the specific good or service is called price. The total number of units that consumers would purchase at that price is called the quantity demanded. A rise in price of a good or service almost always decreases the quantity demanded of that good or service. Conversely, a fall in price will increase the quantity demanded. When the price of a gallon of gasoline increases, for example, people look for ways to reduce their consumption by combining several errands, commuting by carpool or mass transit, or taking weekend or vacation trips closer to home. Economists call this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded the law of demand. The law of demand assumes that all other variables that affect demand, which we explain in the next module, are held constant. We can show an example from the market for gasoline in a table or a graph. Economists call a table that shows the quantity demanded at each price a demand schedule. In this case, we measure price in dollars per gallon of gasoline. We measure the quantity demanded in millions of gallons over some time period, for example, per day or per year, and over some geographic area like a state or a country. A demand curve shows the relationship between price and quantity demanded on a graph with quantity on the horizontal axis and the price per gallon on the vertical axis. In economic terminology, demand is not the same as quantity demanded. When economists talk about demand, they mean the relationship between a range of prices and the quantities demanded at those prices, as illustrated by a demand curve or a demand schedule. When economists talk about quantity demanded, they mean only a certain point on the demand curve or one quantity on the demand schedule. In short, demand refers to the curve and quantity demanded refers to a specific point on the curve. In economic terminology, supply is not the same as quantity supplied. When economists refer to supply, they mean the relationship between a range of prices and the quantities supplied at those prices, a relationship that we can illustrate with a supply curve or a supply schedule. When economists refer to quantity supplied, they mean only a certain point on the supply curve or one quantity on the supply schedule. In short, supply refers to the curve and quantity supplied refers to a specific point on the curve. The shape of supply curves will vary somewhat according to the product. Steeper, flatter, straighter, or curved. Nearly all supply curves, however, share a basic similarity. They slope up from left to right and illustrate the law of supply. As the price rises, say from $100 per gallon to $220 per gallon, the quantity supplied increases from 500 gallons to 720 gallons. Conversely, as the price falls, the quantity supplied decreases. Equilibrium is the place where supply and demand intersect. Because the graphs for demand and supply curves both have price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, the demand curve and supply curve for a particular good or service can appear on the same graph. Together, demand and supply determine the price and the quantity that will be bought and sold in a market. The word equilibrium means balance. If a market is at its equilibrium price and quantity, then it has no reason to move away from that point. However, if a market is not at equilibrium, then economic pressures arise to move the market toward the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. What factors affect demand? We define demand as the amount of some product a consumer is willing and able to purchase at each price. That suggests at least two factors that affect demand. Willingness to purchase suggests a desire based on what economists call tastes and preferences. If you neither need nor want something, you will not buy it, and if you really like something, you will buy more of it than someone who does not share your strong preference for it. Ability to purchase suggests that income is important. Professors are usually able to afford better housing and transportation than students because they have more income. Prices of related goods can affect demand also. If you need a new car, the price of a Honda may affect your demand for a Ford. Finally, the size or composition of the population can affect demand. The more children a family has, the greater their demand for clothing. The more driving-age children a family has, the greater their demand for car insurance, and the less for diapers and baby formula. Other factors that shift demand curves. Income is not the only factor that causes a shift in demand. Other factors that change demand include tastes and preferences, the composition or size of the population, the prices of related goods, and even expectations. A change in any one of the underlying factors that determine what quantity people are willing to buy at a given price will cause a shift in demand. Graphically, the new demand curve lies either to the right, an increase, or to the left, a decrease of the original demand curve. Let's look at these factors. Changing tastes or preferences. From 1980 to 2021, the per-person consumption of chicken by Americans rose from 47 pounds per year to 97 pounds per year, and consumption of beef fell from 76 pounds per year to 59 pounds per year, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA. Changes like these are largely due to movements in taste, which change the quantity of a good demanded at every price. That is, they shift the demand curve for that good rightward for chicken and leftward for beef. Changes in the composition of the population. The proportion of elderly citizens in the United States population is rising. It rose from 9.8% in 1970 to 12.6% in 2000, and will be projected by the U.S. Census Bureau 20% of the population by 2030. A society with relatively more children, like the United States in the 1960s, will have greater demand for goods and services like tricycles and daycare facilities. A society with relatively more elderly persons, as the United States is projected to have by 2030, has a higher demand for nursing homes and hearing aids. Similarly, changes in the size of the population can affect the demand for housing and many other goods. Each of these changes in demand will be shown as a shift in the demand curve. Changes in the prices of related goods. Changes in the prices of related goods, such as substitutes or complements, also can affect the demand for a product. A substitute is a good or service that we can use in place of another good or service. As electronic books like this one become more available, you would expect to see a decrease in demand for traditional printed books. A lower price for a substitute decreases demand for the other product. For example, in recent years, as the price of tablet computers has fallen, the quantity demanded has increased because of the law of demand. Since people are purchasing tablets, there has been a decrease in demand for laptops, which we can show graphically as a leftward shift in the demand curve for laptops. A higher price for a substitute good has the reverse effect. Other goods are complements for each other, meaning we often use the goods together because consumption of one good tends to enhance consumption of the other. Examples include breakfast cereal and milk, notebooks and pens or pencils, golf balls and golf clubs, gasoline and sport utility vehicles, and the 5-way combination of bacon, lettuce, tomato, mayonnaise, and bread. If the price of golf clubs rises, since the quantity demanded of golf clubs falls because of the law of demand, demand for a complement good like golf balls decreases too. Similarly, a higher price for skis would shift the demand curve for a complement good like ski resort trips to the left, while a lower price for a complement has the reverse effect. Changes in expectations about future prices or other factors that affect demand. While it is clear that the price of a good affects the quantity demanded, it is also true that expectations about the future price, or expectations about tastes and preferences, income, and so on, can affect demand. For example, if people hear that a hurricane is coming, they may rush to the store to buy flashlight batteries and bottled water. If people learn that the price of a good-like coffee is likely to rise in the future, they may head for the store to stock up on coffee now. We show these changes in demand as shifts in the curve. Therefore, a shift in demand happens when a change in some economic factor other than price causes a different quantity to be demanded at every price. We will review the complex relationship between supply and demand in our in-class lectures. Keep in mind that the law of supply and demand drives prices. Prices drive revenue and expenditure, which in turn have great bearing on a nation's gross domestic product.